Hello and welcome to episode 82 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, our home province makes international headlines for something that I absolutely love. I accidentally watched the Detroit Evening News and I'm shocked by what I hear. I learned things from my daughter's climate change assignment. And an update on all the battery production in the world, right here on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. Brian, welcome back. You were on an EV road trip. How was it?
Yeah, I know you always worry about the range in terms of a highway trip, and especially because I was going to Calgary, which is a frequent trip for people from our city. It's an 8-hour drive. But I broke it up into a couple of days, so we didn't do the whole 8 hours in one day. But I don't know. I'm here to tell you that the Standard Range Plus is quite adequate for highway travel. Now, you know, it's going to be a different story in the dead of winter, but Tesla seems to have really spaced apart the Superchargers. As long as you're on a route that has the Tesla Superchargers, like the Trans-Canada Highway does, they seem to have placed them with, you know, standard range cars in mind. So I do think going forward in the future, as the cheaper electric cars come out, I think, you know, that 400 kilometer range is going to be pretty common and pretty standard, and it's not really a problem for Tesla vehicles. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention.
All right. I'm still skeptical. I still remain skeptical. The weather's nice. It's not too hot that you had to crank the air conditioning. It's kind of perfect EV weather.
Yeah, but we did have a pretty stiff headwind on the way there. So, you know, the energy consumption was quite high. So we definitely had to stop at every supercharger on the way there. On the way back, we did as well stop at every one, but we actually could have skipped one of them because, you know, a little bit of a tailwind.
So what was your typical stop time?
20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most.
Really?
It worked out great because you stop, you go to the bathroom, you get a bite to eat, and then occasionally you come back to the car and you're like, oh, okay, we've got to wait for another 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. So yeah, the charging was great. I absolutely love EV road tripping, and I hope to do more of it in the future. It's
just your speed, isn't it? It's relaxed, it's slow paced. Where did you stop your first night?
Yeah, so first night we went to Lethbridge. So I kind of want to go over this because it was kind of an EV tour of oil and gas country, because, you know, I went to Calgary, Alberta, which is, you know, the home of oil and gas in Canada. So, you know, especially driving in an EV, especially being on a podcast about clean energy, I was thinking about all of the oil and gas stuff that we saw. So yeah, first place we stopped was Lethbridge, Alberta, and we just kind of toured around. They have an amazing train bridge in Lethbridge. I forget what it's called, but they have this big valley, and in the early 1900s they built this massive steel train bridge over this valley, and it's super impressive. It's been there over 100 years. It looks great. But we toured around there, and you know, there used to be coal production in that valley. So they have a little sort of tourist thing about what the coal production would be like. So that was sort of the first fossil fuel stop. And then, of course, you drive through, on the way back, drove through Medicine Hat. And I'd forgotten, but the slogan for Medicine Hat, Alberta, it's kind of an odd name for a town, but that's the name of the town. But their slogan is the Gas City, because they're known for natural gas in Medicine Hat. And then, of course, in Calgary, we stayed at a hotel called the Wesley Hotel, and it was built into a former headquarters of an oil and gas company. It was this 5-story office building that was no longer in use, and so they recently converted it into a hotel. So it used to be a kind of a small office building. So that was interesting. Nothing really particularly visible about, you know, what kind of used to be there, but that was super interesting. And in Calgary, we went to the Inglewood Bird Sanctuary, which is a bird sanctuary where they've tried to naturalize the landscape, and it used to be an oil refinery. Many years ago, they took out the oil refining, to try and restore the habitat. So, yeah, that was super interesting. And do you know what the slogan is for the city of Calgary?
No.
The slogan is, and they changed it recently, Calgary, be part of the energy. They used to be the heart of the New West, something like that. That was the slogan.
I think that should have been, those slogans should be reversed. That should have been their old slogan. And now,
This is, I guess, my point is that it's really a huge part of the culture, for us here in Saskatchewan, but really more so in Alberta. Like, they're known for the Calgary Stampede, their big kind of rodeo that they put on every year, so that they have a kind of a cowboy kind of image.
Yeah.
But it's cowboys and oil and gas. That's really the two kind of identity things, and they're digging in their heels even deeper now that the energy sector is in danger of shrinking or going away. That was my tour through oil and gas country.
So, Brian, my son, I mention him every show, it seems. He went off to university, 2.5 hours north at the University of Saskatchewan, and he's finding the strange thing that I kind of remember from my first year of university. I'll ask you if you feel the same way. He's finding that he's getting a lot of different opinions, but they're Saskatchewan opinions. He's getting people from rural Saskatchewan, from the Bible Belt, from oil country. In fact, one of his teaching assistants actually worked in the oil industry as an engineer and got laid off, and completely identifies as an oil person, as that is a positive thing. The oil industry is positive. It is a great thing that we have that not everyone else in the world has, and we're making money off of it, and look at us. And I've never experienced that before. Growing up, I knew us as a wheat province and flat, but not as oil. Like, we had it, but I never knew ourselves as that.
Yeah, well, and just, the fact that, where we are is more it's known more for agriculture, farming. But even that I was always divorced from because I was never a farm kid. So you probably had the same experience.
Yeah.
If you go to high school in our city, a lot of the kids have a family farm. Like, they may live in the city now, but it's like, oh yeah, they go to the family farm on the weekends. There's a heritage of farming. But I don't have a connection to that, and I don't have a connection to the oil and gas. So you and I are the freaks around here.
I know I've got a close relative who has oil on her property. She does well. I mean, not
Yeah.
It's free. It's not like she's rich or anything, but it's free oil. She doesn't own the oil, but gets leased payments.
Yeah, well, we have a cottage at Kenosi Lake, which is near Carlisle, which is oil country. So there's, oil rigs on a lot of properties. And apparently it's a bit of a divide in the community because some people have gotten rich and some people have not. It's those who have an oil rig on their property have been laughing all these years, but not everybody has it. So it's a bit of a divide.
Yeah, my late uncle bought a new trailer before he'd passed away a few years ago, and he was kind of ashamed of it, didn't tell anyone. But at the same time, he was living in it because his farmhouse was so decrepit that when he was out there, he lived in the trailer. And he took it out to the music festival every year. But yeah, my son is just kind of really shocked by the culture that he's experiencing. I remember, I've still got great friends that were from small towns, and some of them still have very much so the small town never left them. My partner is from a small town, but she has no direct connection to agriculture, and she kind of rejected the small town aspect of her life. That's in university. She became very socially active and,
Yeah, I always thought of myself as a city person, which is kind of ridiculous when you think of it's a pretty small city that we live in, 250,000 people. But, my world was the world of watching movies from New York and Tokyo and around the world. So I always thought of myself as a city person amongst the country folk here.
So I'll tap on a couple of quick things in my life here before we get on with the show. I left my car door unlocked because I went and picked up my daughter from school, and she didn't lock it. She likes to stay in the car for a long period of time and gather her thoughts and things. And it seems like whenever we leave a car door open here, somebody breaks into it. It's like the first time. Like, it happens like once a year I leave the car door open. And every time it seems like somebody will go in there. Like, they're just trying it every night. And so I was really worried about my EV charger because all cars, there was nothing of value in there, really. There was like a wireless charger for phones that was $20 at Costco. They didn't take that. I don't know what they're looking for, money, or I don't have a garage to break into, so they weren't looking for the little button to open the garage door. So I was worried it was gone, but they didn't take it. So yeah, it was a 110 level 1 charging cable that comes with the car, but it'd be, a couple $100 from a wrecker or something to replace.
Yeah, I think usually people are looking for loose change or something if the car's open.
They left a quarter, Brian. Kids these days are getting greedy. They left a quarter.
Really?
Perfectly good quarter.
The town of Churchill, Manitoba, which is kind of northern Canada, It's against the law. Did you know this? It's against the law in Churchill, Manitoba to lock your car. Do you know why?
No.
Because they've got polar bears. And people need to be able to escape from
Get into
polar
the
bears.
car.
So it's illegal to leave your car locked in Churchill, Manitoba.
Most of you listening aren't from Canada. You're from around the world. You may have some different stereotypes of Canada. If I look out my window now, I'm not looking at a polar bear. I'm looking at a arid city in a farming province. And we're a long way from polar bears, but that is a pretty interesting story. Another thing, Brian, we talked a lot about car fires and EVs recently and how they're actually more prevalent in combustion vehicle cars. Well, I saw a car fire the other day.
Really?
I saw one myself down the street, driving on the ring road to pick up my kid, and there was a car on fire. It was an old hot rod kind of muscle car from the 70s or 80s, which probably helped it ignite. But there was a fire truck there hosing it off. And another thing that I wanted to point out, the IATSE union, which is the union of people who work on film and television shows in North America, is voted to go on strike, right? Well, one of their big issues was nodding off. Like you and I have both worked on shows. I'm sure, I don't know if you've worked behind the camera as a peon. I've worked as a bottom of the rung peon on movies for a couple of years after school. And you would work 14, 16 hours. And some days on Fridays, they try to go long. That's the last day of the week. So they'll go right into Saturday morning. People are just, sometimes they work for 24 hours. The lower the budget, the more likely that is to happen. But even on medium budget films, it happens. And what happens is people nod off on their cars going home. And I have a friend who's talking about it on Facebook. And I was curious that one of the people said they drove a Tesla and their autopilot has saved their life more than once. Because they're so exhausted.
Yeah, this is one of the most dangerous things about working in film and television. I mean, it can be dangerous on the set, but it's driving home after those really long days. And so this is one of the reasons that IATSE is going on strike, to combat these kind of long days. And productions are offering hotels and stuff now. It's maybe not as bad as it used to be, but I know our friend Don, who's probably listening, he told me the other day he worked a 28-hour day once on an independent movie.
I hope he was a younger man when he did that.
Yeah, he was.
Because that's just... I couldn't do that now. I mean, obviously I couldn't do that now.
But something like autopilot can absolutely save you in a situation like that where you start to fall asleep.
But there's an ethical question. You shouldn't be driving when you're that tired.
And you shouldn't be driving.
Autopilot or not.
And you shouldn't be working 28-hour days.
All right, Brian, in Saskatchewan, Canada, where we live, we don't normally focus on that because most of our listeners are elsewhere. However, we have talked about in the spring, the Saskatchewan government did something that most of us in the EV community didn't like. Could you set that up for us?
Yeah, they introduced a road tax, a yearly road tax for electric vehicles. And at the time they did it, there was about 400 electric vehicles in our entire province, which has, millions of miles of roads in it. Now there's about 628 electric cars, and this $150 a year road tax has just come in. And it's meant to replace what they don't get from the gasoline tax, because part of the gasoline tax goes to upkeep on the roads. So in and of itself, it's not a terrible idea because people have to pay taxes, roads have to be built. But with so few EVs in our province, this is absolutely going to cost more to administer than they collect for at least the first couple of years. And clearly they've done it because we live in oil and gas country, and they're trying to make a stupid point.
It was a dirty, disgusting, stupid point by our oil-drenched premier, who's in charge of this provincial government and their party, which is has close ties to the oil industry, often funded by the oil industry in Alberta. And I absolutely hated. I guessed on Twitter about a year and a half ago that this would happen. I wonder if somebody read it.
Shit, it's your fault.
Some stooge of the Sass party read it and got the idea. This is how we can punish the environmentalists because they can't do it enough. Well, guess what? You're going to be embarrassed, you jackass government people, because not only is there a satirical thing which came out on Electric, where The headline is Canadian group satirizes Saskatchewan's dumb EV tax by suggesting a sidewalk tax. They're being satirical about that. The province of Saskatchewan has joined a growing number of regions around the world levying punitive taxes against EV drivers. Well, it's kind of ridiculous here when there's hardly anybody who has one. We're kind of the last adopting place there'll be for something like this. And this has made headlines on electric, but there's more. Yes, there's more, because they're actually teaming up with an environmental agency, a nonprofit group will refund this tax to Canadian EV owners during the first month of its implementation. That is to say, they are fundraising to give this tax back, and Brian Stockton, could not be happier. Are you happy? Does this please your cockles?
That's fantastic. And I think there's also some option about donating money as well. So, I forget the details, but that is fantastic.
Yes, you can donate the money to environmental groups or an environmental group, and which is fine. But here's what I think. This is going to be controversial. I think we should all take the money.
Yeah.
And then donate it.
Yeah.
Because I think that would piss off the government more if the money went right back in our pockets. And this is what I think. And I think it's I don't know. What do you think?
Yes. No, you make a convincing argument, because I would love to get $150.
Nothing says revenge like money in my pocket. 400 EVs when the thing started. So, yeah. And it started only a couple days ago on October 1st. And the only province in Canada to adopt an EV tax. And we have the least EVs per capita and the least EVs period in Canada. Hardly anything happening here. By the way, there's no government funding, nothing to incentivize EV purchasing in Saskatchewan aside from the federal program. So it's not like they're offsetting, like I know Georgia encouraged EV purchasing with grants and tax credits, and then had an EV tax as well. California would fall into that as well. But obviously California is a different situation than us by far.
Yeah, they waited until there was 700,000 EVs on the road in California before they implemented this tax, which some argue even then shouldn't maybe have been done.
So this is called the Small Change Fund, and it is a national crowdfunding nonprofit group, and it is responding with this equally unprecedented refund. This is Brian Stockton. This is huge news, and it's going to be written about around the world, I predict. It might even show up in some textbooks. People, when they refer to how people fought back against the oil lobby, this is. I would be so jealous if this was taking place in Australia or somewhere else, you know, which seems like it might.
We're right in the middle.
It's happening right here.
It's amazing.
It's going into my pocket. I get to decide if I support a charity or buy my kids clothes. You know what pisses me off, though? I have a Nissan Leaf, which is the first generation of electric cars, and it doesn't go very far. It goes maybe 100 kilometers. And so it's a city car, so I don't drive very much.
Yeah. And
then you throw the pandemic on top of that, and it's sat around for a year, and it doesn't do very much driving.
No,
so I'm disproportionately
and
affected.
At least like a fuel tax that's on a gallon of or a liter of gasoline. The more gasoline you buy, the more tax you pay for road use. So you're right, that makes sense. So somebody could be driving 100,000 kilometers a year and paying the same tax as you, who doesn't drive very much at all.
So Saskatchewan EV owners, congratulations. They say this sends a powerful message to the government of Saskatchewan. The president of the Small Change Fund is a guy named Malsberg, and he's a U of S professor. There's a U of S professor involved at the University of Saskatchewan in economics. And he says, if you can't be part of the solution, other people will. And I'm talking to you, Sask Party. You can't be part of the solution. Someone else will step up and do what you cannot do because you're impotent. Glad I have a camera.
Watch your blood pressure, James.
It's always up, Brian. It's always up when we do the podcast. But this is going to make me sleep well at night now. So this is a step to fix your short-sighted act, they say, and it's going to be released to the media tomorrow, and I'm imagining a lot of ink will be spilled about this because I love this. Teenage James would love this. Middle-aged James loves this. I love I wish I did. I'm just mad I didn't have the idea.
And of course, it's quite possible to fundraise and pay everyone's fees because there's hardly any of us that have an electric vehicle.
Yes, it's not a huge deal, but it's and this will just make more headlines, which will encourage more people to know, hey, EVs exist. People love them. And let's get more EVs sold.
Yes, and I will mention too, driving around in Alberta, I did not see very many Teslas. Of course, last summer I went to Vancouver, the West Coast, and there were Teslas everywhere. But not so much here in oil and gas country.
So they created a campaign called sidewalktax.ca. That's a satirical campaign to tax sidewalks for people being environmental and walking. So it's the most wonderful story, Brian, I've ever had the privilege of talking about on this podcast. We're 82 episodes in and a year and a half, and I'm just a happy James.
Fantastic.
I want to thank those people who did this. And by all means, check it out. We'll do some more stuff.
And I guess you could donate money, and then it'll go to James and me.
Sure, donate money, and we'll use it to get drunk on the podcast and give to environmental groups. How about something like that?
Yeah. So there is another announcement from the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a new policy to make the grid completely clean by 2035. So we've talked before about greening the grid in the UK. And of course, they're working on that undersea cable from Morocco that's going to provide some of it. But this is a big deal. This is a stepping up the date from other dates that they've talked about. Here in Canada, we actually have a pretty clean grid, except for our province and the one next door. 95% clean or something like that in Canada. So that's one area we're doing well here. But that certainly has not been the case in the UK. But they're expecting to be totally renewable sources by 2035. That does include nuclear, which is controversial, but at least it doesn't produce any greenhouse gases.
Brian, I'm disappointed.
Really?
Yeah, it's because I read the script wrong. I read it that Brian pledges a green grid by 2035.
No, Britain.
I thought you were going to be net zero by 2035. You have some amazing plans to announce.
No.
Which is possible. You still might do that, right? I mean,
I'm close to, well, I guess I'm not that close. I've got a natural gas furnace, but
beyond that, you're laughing. All right, Brian, the other night I was minding my own business, and we live in Saskatchewan, as we've mentioned before, and we, for some time, have got the cable news channel, not the cable news channels, the cable network channels from the States, the broadcast channels, NBC, etc., for Detroit. And that used to fascinate me as a kid, as a ute, when we first had those channels to watch all the murder, which we didn't have here, and gunplay, which we didn't have here. Yeah. We've got more of that here now, but it was quite a fascinating watch. It was kind of reality television that scared the pants off me as a youth, seeing a big city newscast. But I haven't watched it in decades, and I just happened to see it the other night. And the top story on it, on WDIV, was that Ford was building battery factories, and that's a big story for Michigan. However, to my surprise, they're not building them in Michigan. And they said that, but they were still excited about it. In fact, it seemed like they were really beholden to the auto industry, this newscast. Like they were cheering it on, and it seemed really weird to me.
But they were ultimately happy about this switch to electric?
Yeah.
Let's move now to Ford's major announcement, with the Dearborn automaker going all in on electric vehicles with an $11 billion investment. They'll create thousands and thousands of new jobs.
Then they talked to the Ford CEO, Mr. Ford himself, and he was quite bullish on EVs.
If my great-grandfather saw our industry 5 years ago, it would be very recognizable to him. Now we're on the cusp of a revolution.
Yeah, he's going hard on EVs. But what really surprised me was the anchors were fairly EV literate. You can sort of hear them talking over each other, but they knew the benefit of EVs.
Well, and Jason, the decision makers at not only Ford, but all the automakers know that they have to deal with a lot of buyers who really aren't ready to give up on the roar of an engine and doing it the old gasoline way, right?
He had a very quick answer to that very concern for the buyer, and he would speak directly to them and say, just try it. I know you've been down this road. People
Yes.
worry about what that's going to be. Am I going to be able to go when I want to go? And I remember one of the executives here with the Lightning said, you're going to hit that pedal, and it's going to go from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds in an electric vehicle.
I feel far more likely to get a case of whiplash in the Mustang Mach-E than in the other car right now. Yeah, all right, Jason.
Without the lag of the transmission,
that's
going
right.
from first to second to third or whatever. It's just
the automatic torque
incredible.
is something you really have to experience.
So there you have auto industry boosters talking about the not having the lag. They understand. The Ford F-150 was announced recently, and it's starting to permeate car culture.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. But yeah, absolutely. Of course, Detroit is the home of, U.S. auto. So the local television would have been tied up with the auto industry for decades now. It's obviously a huge part of the city.
This is the Clean Energy Show.
Okay, and further to EV and battery factory news, Foxconn has bought an EV factory in Ohio in a $230 million deal. So Foxconn is the Chinese company that manufactures Apple's iPhones. So they're a tech manufacturer. But they've purchased this factory from Lordstown Motors, which is a company that is working with General Motors, a startup. Basically, Foxconn is just sort of throwing their hat in the ring with Lordstown, with General Motors. They've put $50 million into Lordstown just as an investment and spending a lot of money on this plant that is going to make electric vehicles.
In Ohio, do you think Foxconn might make the Apple car, the mysterious Apple car?
Well, of course, as soon as this deal was announced, that was the speculation because Foxconn obviously has a relationship with Apple. But it sounds like that is probably not the case, that this is a deal more tied to GM and Lordstown. So still really no word, no update really on the Apple car. So that still seems to be vaporware for the far, far distant future.
We are willing to learn.
What James learned.
I learned something interesting this week, Brian. A bunch of tidbits I'm going to throw at you.
Okay.
The scenario is this. It was just last night. My daughter went to bed and missed a video she was supposed to watch on climate change, so we had to watch it at home. And she laughed and said, I'm not going to learn anything. I know everything. My dad has an electric car. We have solar panels on the roof. If you think I'm going to learn anything, that's just crazy. Well, I learned a bunch of stuff. This was a good video. It's from In a Nutshell YouTube channel, which my family has actually watched a bunch of stuff, and my kids have become smarter than they otherwise would have been by watching these really well researched animated videos on YouTube. So I'm just really impressed. So I'm just going to play you really short sound bites of the things I learned. Here's number one.
A programmer in the US has a higher CO2 footprint than 50 farmers in Uganda.
I guess that's not surprising. A programmer's making lots of money, buying lots of cars, has a big home, has big computers, and 50 farmers in Uganda, their emissions are coming from their crops or not much else. Maybe the odd burp.
Yes, and as we were sort of talking about before, like you and I have solar panels, we have electric cars, but we both still have gas furnaces, and we live in a super cold place. So our carbon footprint is probably still, way bigger than most people in the world.
And I've got just this podcast right now is solar powered, as we pointed out last week, but there's a lot of equipment here. In fact, it's making my room pretty hot as climate change makes this October day hotter than it's ever been.
The emissions leaking out of landfills are as significant as the emissions of all the jets in the air.
Yes, the landfill emissions, which is not something we talk about very often, is greater than the emissions from all the jets flying, which is something we do hear about a lot. So that's
that's fascinating.
So maybe we do. I've always been mystified by the need to compost on your garbage. Like some cities, my wife is jealous of her sister in Calgary who can compost. We have a composter in the yard, which she diligently uses in minus 40. But it's, you can take your compost away and you can get free compost back from the city in places that do that. And they're experimenting with it here in Regina where we live. And hopefully we'll get it soon. But I mean, that I would imagine is not your washer and dryer that gets thrown into the landfill that causes global warming necessarily, although it will rust and decay a bit. It's probably the food waste, isn't it?
Yeah, I would bet all that rotting food waste for sure. Yeah.
All right, here's clip number 3.
8% of CO2 emissions are released by the concrete manufacturing industry.
Now, I know it was a lot. I didn't quite know it was 8%.
That's huge. I'm so shocked.
Yes. And my son is in civil engineering, so I'm keep yelling at him to pay attention because the world is changing. Your life is going to change. Your career is going to change. What they use is going to change. They're going to have to find different ways of making the cement, and the economics might be different if they have to capture the carbon from that production.
Yes, and of course, I'm still hoping to build a new cottage at our cottage property. We're looking at rammed earth, which is a more environmentally friendly way to build, but it would be probably built on a big flat slab of concrete. That's still, a more carbon-intensive thing than we would like, but I'm not sure there's an alternative to that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if something pops up in the next few years, but right now I certainly don't know of any. Here's clip number 4.
Rice alone emits so much methane each year that it practically equals the emissions of all the air traffic in the world.
Rice.
One
food product, rice. I know it is a source of nutrition for a large part of the world. However, that surprised me. Rice.
I guess we have to ban rice now.
I don't think we could do that.
What?
Because the peasants are going to have to eat something. This is all about a lot of the theme of this video is that equality in the world, that we've spoken about this a lot, the countries that are coming up and trying to get out of poverty and into the middle class or just a comfortable lifestyle want that, and they're not going to give anything up for it. And why should they? Because we've had this for 150 years or 100 years is where we are.
Today, about 40% of the world's habitable land is used for meat production in some form or another, the size of North and South America combined.
Now, I've heard that figure before. It didn't stick. I've heard that it was a lot. But the size of the whole Western Hemisphere for making meat? I mean, come on.
That's a bit crazy, but of course, we do think that is going to change in the coming years as we talk about, fake meat and precision fermentation. So this is possibly a good news area where we'll be able to do something else with that land if we're not using it all for meat.
Yeah, I think the area of meat, we talked about wind, solar, EVs, electrified transportation, and meat and food, because we're going to talk more and more about it as the show goes on, because it is so important. Think about all that land. 40% of the habitable land of the world is used to make food, not to mention the emissions that food has, particularly beef. So as we move to a economic disruption from the technology that will make fake meats and make it cheaper eventually, and therefore more preferable, that land is going to be freed up. What do we do with the land? Do we plant trees? Can we plant trees? And like I said, I've traveled through the U.S. Southwest for days, and it seems like nothing could possibly live or grow there, but there's cattle fences up everywhere. It seems like it's desert, but there's cattle fences because somewhere there's cattle.
No, and we drove through cattle country on our trip. We also went to the Cypress Hills in Saskatchewan, which is kind of ranch country, and lots of cattle grazing there for sure.
Here's clip 6.
The concept of your personal carbon footprint was popularized by the oil producer BP in a 2005 ad campaign. Arguably one of the most effective and sinister pieces of propaganda that still seriously distracts all of us from the reality of the situation.
But that wasn't something I learned because I learned it from the podcast from you a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So, yes,
I'm smart.
They were on top of that. They must have listened to our podcast before they made that show.
Of course.
It's just interesting that they slipped it in there and school kids are watching this little bits of political anger slipped in there. But of course, the ultimate theme of this video and the things that my kid is learning is that, there's up and coming economies that want what we have. And, the practice of individual guilt that carbon footprints imply are irrelevant because we really can't make a difference, you and I.
No, and it's kind of the same problem we're having right now with the COVID epidemic is that the public health officials in certain places, they're trying to shift it to personal responsibility, which is not the point of public health. The point of public health is to make policy that helps everybody. But in the COVID epidemic, everyone's gotten tired of lockdowns and everything. So a lot of governments and authorities are just saying, it's up to you guys to manage your COVID. Good luck.
Well, the other thing that the video did say is that, obviously the thing to do is the people who pull the levers to put pressure on them, the governments in there. And that's happening. Like the Conservative government in the UK is doing major things. You mentioned it on the show this week. They've done other things with ICE bans because people are demanding it. And even the Conservative Party in Canada in the last election campaign last month got fairly green. And no one really believed them, but their policies were there trying to convince the middle ground voters that, yes, we do care. So it is an important issue.
The advance continues.
Now, Brian, I just wanted to mention an article I read from Reuters, who did some work tallying up all the battery factory construction underway in the world. I'm going to zip through it here because we're running long on the show already. Something we've talked about a lot, but let's get to it. So they're predicting a third of new car sales will be EVs by 2030 worldwide. You and I don't buy that, right?
Yeah, it should be sooner than that, hopefully.
There'd have to be a terrible shortage. The CEO or big people at VW were caught at a meeting or a presentation talking about how they're falling behind a Tesla, that it takes 3 days to make a VW ID car compared to 1 day for Tesla or something like that. Did you catch that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's they're realizing, I think, how much work they have to do to catch Tesla.
So CATL is the largest battery maker in the world. They're slightly larger than LG. They're currently making 65 gigawatt hours annually, but has factories being built currently that will not only double that, but double that plus 50%. So 2.5 times the current output very shortly. That is a big change, and that's going to continue.
Yeah, and they're one of the suppliers for Tesla. The iron batteries for the lower range Tesla cars are now starting to come from CATL. So yeah, they're the biggest player and supplying Tesla and others.
So LG will have 155 gigawatt hours by the end of this year and 430 by 2025. That's about a tripling in 3 years. That would power 7 million EVs from that company alone. And to put that in perspective, last year there was only 2.5 million EVs made in the world last year. So that would power almost 3 times that. So that's good because we're really behind on our batteries and it's clogging, it's a major issue right now.
Yeah, this is great to hear.
So Panasonic, they're number 3. They don't disclose the numbers, but they're currently building factories around the world and be making the new Tesla batteries in Japan on a test line this year. That's the new bigger battery, cylindrical batteries. And they're hoping to halve the cost of those batteries. SK, they're planning a 5-fold increase in battery production by 2025. That's big, including 3 Ford plants that we discussed earlier in the show. And those plants by Ford will power 2.2 million EVs annually. And you're talking about how Ford wasn't planning on making a whole lot of F-150s, although there's going to be a huge demand for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just adding up these numbers quickly in my head, and this means a lot of EVs by hopefully 2025 from everybody.
And GM announced today that it is building a new battery factory in Michigan to develop lithium metal and solid-state batteries cells. And there's more, hot off the press. Strombolt Americas, is building Canada's first gigawatt-hour scale battery cell production plant, and it's going to be in Quebec. So many battery minerals are available in Canada.
Yeah, that's interesting. We could be a huge player. And Hydro-Quebec, the electricity utility in Quebec, has a lot of battery patents, apparently. This was coming up on some YouTube videos I was watching the other day, but yeah, the electricity utility in Quebec is one of the innovators and originators of the battery technology that's happening right now. They own a lot of patents.
So you have some Tesla news.
Yeah, just quickly. So Tesla released their third quarter delivery numbers, and it was another record. 241,000 Teslas were delivered in the last quarter. So that basically puts them at a run rate of about 1 million vehicles a year. They now have the capacity to make about 1 million vehicles a year, and that's before Austin and Berlin are even open, which should be opening by the end of the year. So Tesla ramping up production, something fierce. Those numbers keep climbing every quarter. They're working around the chip shortage, whereas other automakers are cutting production because of the chip shortage. So continues to be really good progress from Tesla. There was the first Tesla Supercharger in Africa. That's in Morocco. And then here in Canada, the first Supercharger on Prince Edward Island. I thought that was interesting because I really want to do an electric car trip to Atlantic Canada someday. I've never really been to the east coast of Canada. And now there's yeah, don't bother.
As a prairie boy, I don't like the cold and the clouds and the sea wind. But yes, yeah.
I want to visit that Supercharger on Prince Edward Island.
I've been there. Prince Edward Island, in my opinion, is one of the nicer parts of our great East Coast. My mom was from a fishing hamlet in Nova Scotia called Ekamseekam. So shout out to the 10 people in Ekamseekam if you're listening.
And that's a real name. He didn't just make
Yes,
that
it is. It's a real name. Hard to forget once you learned it as a kid. So the chip shortage, a lot of other... the mainstream legacy car makers are down. I think some of them are down 25% in sales, and yet the EVs keep going.
No, and you mentioned seeing hardly any cars on the Toyota lot in our city, that the inventory is down. There's some speculation that it's maybe not all the chip shortage, that, maybe demand is down, so they just decided not to make as many. I'm not sure how true that is, but... the advantage Tesla seems to have is that they've been able to tweak use different chips and tweak the software, whereas the legacy automakers, they kind of need the old crappy chips, and but the chip makers aren't making as many of the older chips that they need.
Yeah, they're stuck to one chip, and if you can't get it, you can't get it in the car. Whereas Tesla has a whole number of them. They update their electrical and firmware. And 19 variants of controllers they have in response to the ongoing semiconductor shortage, which is quite remarkable. Brian, I have some feedback. We have, again, from Weldon in Manitoba, who wrote back, and he apologized. He said, "Hey, I just listened to the podcast this week. Sorry about the story. I pointed out to you as that was fake, and it was not my intent. The internet just cannot be trusted, and do not apologize." Weldon, because, Brian?
Well, it's not exactly a fake story. There was just something fudgy about the facts, and I'm already past it. I don't want to look into it exactly the details.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter if it was fake or not. The fact is, Weldon, a potential EV buyer, got scared off, and we addressed it. And we're going to continue to do that. So, Weldon, if you have any more questions, any more weird things that come up that scare you, drop us a line and we'll not only let you know what the facts are, we'll let everyone else know, because I know a lot of people who listen to this show are potential EV buyers and are thinking about it. If we'd like to hear from you, we'd like nothing better. In fact, contact us at the Clean Energy Show, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Twitter or TikTok, Clean Energy Pod. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for special features and clips from the show where you can see our delightful faces. youtube.com/c/The Clean Energy Show. You can also leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show. Coming up, lightning round, Brian.
What do you think?
Brian, I just wanted to get your impression on headlines that have come out this week. Like, people are not betting against Tesla anymore. Short interest is an all-time low. Do you have any insight onto that?
Yeah, no particular insight, but yeah, Tesla has been famously the most shorted stock on the stock exchange. It's, but I don't know. It's been going up pretty steadily for a couple of years now, so a lot of the short interest has dropped out. It hit above $800 a share the other day, which was fun to see it kind of moving again. But it doesn't make sense with the when the stock continues to rise, the short sellers go away.
And things are looking good for Tesla. I mean, if you look at how other people are struggling with low numbers, yes, they're coming out with EVs. Yes, those EVs are very compelling and well reviewed. However, they can't make very many of them. And I'm hoping that Rivian is an exception to that. The reviews are in, as we mentioned last week, they would be, for the Rivian pickup truck. Did you watch any, and do you have any opinions?
No, I have to get to those soon.
Wow. Well, generally, Rivian had an event in Colorado and had a course and flew in all the YouTubers, and they seemed impressed. And of course, a lot of these people don't drive trucks off-road normally. Mm-hmm. But it seemed quite impressive. And, the truck is not cheap. It's not going to be the best value for an EV out there, even in a truck form, but it certainly is a luxurious adventure vehicle. Speaking of Rivian, Tesla claims Rivian is stealing trade secrets about its next generation battery in an ever-expanding lawsuit. I'm discouraged by that.
Yeah, there were some new additions to the lawsuit recently. I didn't follow all the details, but yeah, Tesla and Rivian are fighting in court.
Now, I thought that Tesla was supposed to welcome everybody to be making these things. I thought they'd be getting along. I wanted them to get along. They're the two foremost EV makers in our hemisphere. And I just wish that, good things would happen from coordinating things or from sharing patents and or whatever, just being happy with each other.
It's too bad.
So Tesla is building Model Y bodies with single front and rear castings, a manufacturing first. This is just in the headlines today, Brian. That's going to reduce manufacturing time and costs, right?
Yeah, so this is something they keep improving, and they get larger and larger castings with these giant gigacasting machines, and they can eliminate so many parts and processes and robots in making cars. So, they're already making good profits on their cars, but as they go to these larger, body castings, their production is just going to get faster. And, we were talking about Volkswagen. It takes them 3 days to make a Volkswagen electric car. Tesla's doing it in 1 day, and they're on their way to make that even shorter.
The world's biggest wind turbine is now in operation. We've talked about it before. It is the GE Heliade X prototype, and it's in Rotterdam, a port city in the Netherlands that has started operating at 14 megawatts. There's a 15 megawatt one out there that they're going to put up soon, a rival company, as they fight for the biggest wind turbine in the world. But I thought it was interesting, and I looked into the first ever offshore wind turbine farm and got some information. It was in 1991, and there was 11 wind turbines. The electricity industry at the time laughed and considered offshore wind turbines to be ludicrous, as they must operate in salty conditions and have much smaller output than central power plants. However, that skeptical attitude had changed 6 years later, as offshore winds drove more energy production than those on land. And each turbine was rated at 450 kilowatts, which is not much. That is 450,000 watts, and 14 megawatts is 14 million watts. That is the current wind turbine compared to the first wind turbine. That is a 31 times power gain. Mind you, the sucker is big. And it's probably positioned in a better place because they have better commuter modeling to have more output over the course of a year than it would otherwise, and than they did back then when they had no modeling or very little modeling. So yeah, it's 130 kilometers off the northeast coast of England. That surprised me. It's really far off the coast.
That's really far, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I guess there's wind there that they didn't have other places. They're not afraid to run the cables anymore because they're getting better at that and more efficient at it. So it's the Dodger Bank A, the Dodger Bank B, and that is the wind farms. They're due to become the largest offshore wind farm in the world upon completion. And 87 of these units are going to be in Dodger C. 87, that says it's a lot. It's a lot of power for a lot of homes from one wind turbine that you can't see, and I'm hoping birds won't be affected either. Brian, it's time for the lightning round. Oh, how we promised to keep the show shorter, and it's bloated this week. It's not bloated, though. It's trim. It's lean. There's so much to talk about. There's things we're not getting to, but let's get to some. Ford says that it is opening orders for the F-150 Lightning at the end of October, 150,000 units sold so far. And they're going to do 80,000 units in 20. We were talking about this last week. You're mentioning how little it was. Well, they've doubled that for 2024. Still not a lot. And in 2022 and 2023, it might be much less, like 15,000 and 55,000 in 23. So it's going to take a frustrating amount of time to get going.
Yeah, it's. I'm impatient. You're impatient. We all want more electric vehicles, but it's ramping up all of this battery production. It's a huge deal. It takes a long time.
Who do you think would make more electric trucks if the demand was equal among Tesla and Ford in 2025? Would Tesla? They're kind of a slow to ramp up, but once they get going, they really get going, don't they?
Yeah, and Ford seems almost reluctant to dip their toes in with these kind of small numbers that they're talking about. But Tesla never talks about small numbers. It's gonna be huge.
I think they're scared of what it's going to do to their combustion, their bread and butter, because they're in competition with themselves in some ways.
Yeah.
So in filings to the Security and Exchange Commission, Rivian said that it has lost $2 billion since the start of last year, something we didn't know about previously. And the company said it expected to spend roughly $8 billion on facilities and equipment through 2023. Amazon has invested $1.8 billion in the company for 100,000 delivery vans. Are you surprised by any of that?
No, it's obviously costs a huge amount of money to start up a new electric vehicle manufacturer. So, Tesla lost money overall for many, many years. So Rivian will also lose money probably for many, many years. But, if they can keep at it, it should be a cash cow in the future.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the UK was going to be 100% of clean electricity by 2035. However, that mix includes a little bit of nuclear, including possible new nuclear, which not everyone is happy about. Are you happy about that?
Well, I have no problem mainly with existing nuclear, but it'd be hard to make an economic argument for new nuclear, but I believe they have some under construction that have been under construction for many, many years, so they will likely go ahead and finish those off, but probably not the best use of their money. They should probably just put out more of those offshore wind turbines.
I mean, there's probably an argument that no one would like to hear this, of just stopping construction and throwing away your losses and going with all clean energy because of the price difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be hard for anyone to do.
Austin, Texas is buying 200 electric buses. That's a big order, Brian. Their whole fleet is 400 buses. Congratulations to Austin. Rivian is hinting at a $10,000 autonomous driving option, just like Tesla, with a software subscription. So do you have any comments? Is that surprising?
No, that's the first I'm hearing of that. That sounds interesting. Hopefully they're working on that.
The Federated Co-op Refinery, 2 miles east of me, yours truly, James Whittingham, Clean Energy Show, is laying off 50 workers, citing both automation efficiencies and leaning up the workforce for the low-carbon economy. It always amazes me, this is the second statement from that refinery on the inevitable low-carbon economy, that they actually get it. No, our politicians that they're juicing their bank accounts with are not getting it, but the refinery is getting it, and that surprises me.
No, and we talked about on the show, they've had, there was a big strike there and hard negotiations going forward with the workers, and probably due to the same things, trying to cut the workforce, cut costs, because, it seems they see the writing on the wall that, but this will probably be the modus operandi going forward for all the kind of fossil fuel infrastructure, would be to avoid spending new infrastructure money, try to keep the costs low. And if they can keep the costs low, then, they can keep pumping out cash for, a few more years to come.
And I think that's what they've done since the oil prices tanked in the mid-teens. They just became more efficient, and there's a lot less jobs involved than there used to be. And a lot of people forget that, especially in the political rhetoric.
Yeah, because they're just not building up like they used to.
Ammonia can be used as a shipping fuel. That's a headline I read, and I'm going to look into it. Okay? I knew that I didn't know anything about it. I just wanted to throw it out there.
So next week, we'll find out.
I don't know if it's
James
next week, but I'm going to look into it, okay? So in the upcoming shows, consider it a teaser. Stellantis prioritizes EVs over ICE vehicles in Europe amid the chip shortage. This relates to the things we've been talking about. First, the pandemic. Now, the chip shortage is caused by the pandemic is boosting EVs over ICE in different markets and different companies. Stellantis makes the Fiat, don't they? The Fiat EV? The little...
yes.
Roadster, or little small car, racy, sporty car. Okay, the renewable developer, subsidiary of SoftBank Group, is making a big bet on an unorthodox grid storage technology, iron flow batteries. They're going to buy 2 gigawatt hours worth of iron flow batteries over the next 5 years from ESS in Oregon. And the interesting part is that this would be for the grid. These flow batteries are for the grid storage. It's only $150 per kilowatt hour, which is pretty decent for these things. Pretty surprising, I guess. So that, we talk about EV batteries, but the grid needs a heck of a lot of storage, and some of it has to be batteries.
Yeah, and it won't necessarily be lithium ion, but we'll see how that plays out.
Okay, Japan's incoming PM, Kishida, says he needs scientific verification that human activities cause global warming.
Oh, my.
Well, I guess he's been reading Facebook. Screw you, Japan. You're screwing up. Your car companies are screwing up. What's going on with you? It's the incumbents, Brian. The incumbents rule the world until they don't. And there's a constant shift between who's the lead. Nokia was in charge. Kodak was in charge. Now they're not. People just don't get it. Robotaxis are getting real in California. Waymo and Cruise are getting permits to roll robotaxis and charge money for people using them. However, Cruise has to have a safety driver. Waymo does not. Under current emission reduction pledges, a child born in 2020 will live through the following: 7 times more heat waves, 2.8 times more floods, 2.6 times more droughts, 2.8 times more crop failures, and 2 times more wildfires than a child like us, born in the early 60s, or I was 66 myself. And all these things will be more severe than they were before. Now, there'll be more of them, and they'll be more severe. And this is later news, recent news. At COP26, John Kerry will launch a coalition of the world's largest companies committing to buy low-carbon products like green steel, something we always talk about on the show, and green cement, something we're not talking about, but we'll talk about. Scaling tech and making them affordable, according to Bloomberg.
No, just from those stats you hurled at us earlier in the show, it's it's not just the obvious things that need carbon reduction, but steel and concrete, a big deal, long way to go there.
Well, we blew past our length objective, but what the hell, Brian? It was a good show. It was a great show. It's always fun talking to you. 26 days from now, we'll be COP26 in Scotland. So, consider rating and reviewing our show on iTunes. Subscribe to us on YouTube and social media. And I'd look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
Bye.